Living on the beautiful Isle of Cumbrae throughout lockdown was indeed a blessing and made me appreciate all the more how blessed I am to be living on this beautiful island. Of course, the weather was amazing, which certainly helped as I cycled the beautiful island and walked all over it. Things were quickly put in place to make sure that everyone was okay and well looked after. Whatever you needed, just a newspaper or a chat, someone was in hand to help. Weekly food packages were left at many doors. These were supplied through a grant as well as the Cumbrae Forum and the generosity of others. They were delivered by a troop of joyful volunteers. Introduced at this time was the Croc Rock newsletter, which was full of important information and supplied us with various phone numbers and up-to-date information on the island. The Croc Rock newsletter is still sent out every few months. All of our shops delivered your needs free of charge, whether it was just a bar of soap or a full shop. Only 4 people at a time were allowed in our small supermarket and only 2 at a time in the smaller shops. Queuing up outside became a social time where we could enjoy a wee blether. The fact that you had to leave 2 metres between you meant you had to speak a bit louder, and before you knew it, the whole queue would join in on the conversation, which was mostly around COVID and how everyone was coping. A great chance for people to say how they were feeling and to vent any frustrations they were having. Our ferry was restricted to essential needs only and monitored by the police. Although I was enjoying the joys of island living, I was very much aware of the effects that this virus was having throughout the country and indeed the whole world. After the first week, I started to think of those I knew who were shielding or just lonely, and started making phone calls on a weekly basis when I could get a signal. As restrictions stated, we could go outside to shop and for 1 hour a day exercise. Although living on the island, we'd a wee bit more freedom. Even on the island, if we met someone, we would either cross the road or leave the said 2-metre distance between us. This provided another opportunity to check in with one another, and throughout this time, we did get to know one another a lot better. It saddened me that after being in lockdown for 2 months, some of the older or vulnerable people that I would call were beginning to wear down by being shut in for so long with no human interaction. After all, we are created as social beings. We have a lovely, very active 90-plus-year-old living on the island. She lives up the hill outside the town, and her cottage is not visible from the road, which meant she could not look out her window and see others walking by. She would go out for her daily walk, but due to her location, seldom saw anyone. I would call her from time to time, and it saddened me how isolated she was. A few times I went up to her cottage, rang her bell, and stood well back, more than the usual 2 metres, to make sure she was safe. And we would have a visit. I know that this was breaking the rule, but sometimes you just have to put love above the law. One of our beloved characters, who was very well known, died throughout this time. His funeral was not being held on the island, but many of us stood along the front as his hearse passed by and the piper played the pipes. We stood and clapped as his hearse passed by, but how sad to see his wife sitting alone in the limo that followed her beloved husband. We then left in silence with our own thoughts. I felt it was becoming a very cruel world. Due to the fact that no one was allowed on the island and we adhered to the rules, there was no COVID on the island as far as I know. I have a dear friend on the island who turned 80 throughout this time, which meant the celebration that her family had arranged for her had to be cancelled. I felt as though I had to do something for her special day. I bought a small cake and put a few candles on it. Then I rummaged through my things to find something I could give her as a wee present. I arrived at her back door and called her on the phone and told her to open the door for me and leave the room. I put the wee cake, the card, the re-gifted present down and lit a few candles. I left her kitchen, then stepped back more than the 2 metres required and called her to come back into the room, and then I sang Happy Birthday. We laughed, but my heart was crying as I thought of her loving family having to miss out on this much anticipated celebration. Another act of love overruling the law. So, as much as I loved my time on my wee island throughout these few months of isolation, great sadness and many losses, I was by no means living with my head in the sand. Clapping for essential workers on a Thursday night at 8 o'clock was a highlight on the island. It allowed us once more to say hello to our closest neighbours. This time, the time was announced by the Cathedral of the Isles ringing their bells, and a piper on the front by the water playing the bagpipes. It was an emotional time for me, as in those few minutes of showing support by standing outside, I would think in all those people selflessly putting their own lives at risk so that others could get the help they so badly needed. After a few minutes clapping, we would retreat in silence into our own homes with our own thoughts. I have seen how much this lockdown has affected all of us, spiritually, socially, healthily, physically, as well as emotionally. I don't think we will ever realise the extent of the damage that it has done to so many people. The human spirit is indeed resilient. Looking back on it now, it seems so surreal. Did this really happen? Did we really live a life of restriction, isolation, so many deaths, sadness, and so much loss? As for myself, it has certainly made me a much more grateful person. grateful for my faith that brought me through this time, my family, and the joys of living here surrounded by such beauty in nature and in the kindness of others.